Well, we continue our build-up to the final of the Rugby World Cup, and everywhere you look today, people are sporting Springbok rugby shirts in the different parts of the country. Tomorrow, there will be the fan parks for throngs of loyal fans to watch the Rugby World Cup final between South Africa and New Zealand. This show of support, although seemingly patriotic, is also one of a myriad of activities that have huge business and economic spin-offs for the people who seize the moment. Where are these opportunities? Who runs them? And are they claiming a piece of the pie? We are now joined by Sports Economist Nqobile Ndlovu. Nqobile, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Before we get into the business of sports, especially rugby, considering that we're building up to the final, how do you feel about the Boks chances of lifting up that Webb Ellis Cup once again?
Good morning, Aldrin. I'm saving my Springbok shirt for tomorrow, just for those who are going to ask the question. On the Springboks and their chances, the 7-1 split, we used it against New Zealand leading up to the World Cup, and it worked out quite well. We dominated them in the second half, but I don't think it will be the same New Zealand team this time round. I think it'll be very close. I would not be surprised if it's swung by 3 points. Patriotically, I will say South Africa to win 15-12. 15-12.
15-12, and not the 1 point difference that we saw between France as well as England. So very optimistic. Let's see what's going to happen tomorrow. Let's now speak about the business. What's the market value of spin-offs from international sporting events like this nature?
It's a difficult one to say, Aldrin, because we don't currently do a good enough job in terms of quantifying what our sports tourism market is worth. If you take, for instance, a tournament such as the World Cup itself, France, who ultimately got to host the World Cup, had to pay a fee to World Rugby. And beyond that, what they're expecting is somewhere in the region of $140 billion in terms of economic revenue from the World Cup. But within South Africa itself, we don't necessarily do a good enough job in terms of quantifying what the value is of a tournament like this. But you would see tournaments such as, for instance, the MTN 8, which played recently in Durban. The Etugan municipality pumped in about 13 million rand towards hosting that tournament, and they were expected to generate about 26 million rand in economic revenue. So there are economic spin-offs that come out of hosting major sporting tournaments like this.
Yeah. The other thing is, so driving to work this morning, one of the other things that I noticed was how many different brands have the Springbok logos attached to their brands. Of course, it also speaks to the marketing around it. When it comes to the trademark of the rugby, the Springboks rugby logo, are there any conditions that we know of that limit how far brands can go with their association, or do they need any concurrence from the Springboks to say, or even SARA for that matter, to say that sure, it's fine, you can use the logo?
Right. So the Springbok logo is licensed by SA Rugby, and it's been licensed by SA Rugby since 1995. Coincidentally, the term Amabogobogo is not licensed by SA Rugby, but it's licensed by a separate company. It's called the Amabogobogo Company. And if you want to use the term Amabogobogo in relation to a competition or anything to that effect, you have to have license rights in order to do that. Now, the Springbok logo itself, if you see brands such as Escort, who put up a billboard at OR Tambo leading up to the tournament, and they said they had created an entire campaign. They were selling Escort boxes and purporting to support the Springboks without actually having an agreement with the Springboks. That was found to be incorrect, and the court actually asked them to take it down. If I'm not mistaken, there was further legal action which was being taken by SA Rugby with regards to that. So brands have to be very, very, very careful in terms of even the wording that they use in association with the Springboks if they don't have a relationship with the Springboks, because you can't actually profit from content or material that seeks to make it seem as though you have a business relationship or a license agreement with SA Rugby in order to use the name, the image, or the likeness of SA Rugby towards, generating a profit for your own business. So, yes, the intention is for the country and for brands to get around the Springboks, but they have to be careful in that if the material then seeks to generate a profit for you as a brand, then SA Rugby has the right to come after you, and they can come after you for other reasons as well. But it's a very fine line, the licensing issue, and this is also what affects the supply of Springbok official shirts, because Nike has the license to manufacture Springbok training kits and official shirts, but their distribution network is very limited, and that has basically resulted in the shortage of Springbok shirts being around. So the licensing issue is multifaceted, and it affects a lot of various factors in society and business.
Yeah, and with that shortage, of course, then you have the black market that plugs that hole as well, which also then comes at a much cheaper cost compared to an authentic Nike rugby jersey. What are the implications for those in the black market who also create their own offshoots of the Springboks official jersey?
Yeah, so the guys on the street, generally, for them, their only fear is a Metro Police official will come after me and take my merchandise away, etc. But there are brands who like to create sort of replicating shirts that possibly look like a Springbok shirt but aren't officially a Springbok shirt, and they don't have a license agreement with SA Rugby in order to produce the Springbok. Well, there is only one company, which is Nike, that has the right to produce and sell official Springbok memorabilia. A brand such as Old School, who is a brand which has a very similar color green, a very similar color yellow that's on the collar, but the Springbok emblem is not the same, they get away with it because they don't associate with the Springboks. They don't say that their shirts are Springbok replica shirts, and the Springbok logo is different. So they know the nuances with regard to exactly how the license rules work, and they get away with it in that way. But if, let's say, for instance, a company goes and prints replica shirts off their own, they go to a printing shop, they put an actual Springbok logo on that, they can be sued by SA Rugby for copyright infringement because it's not housed by them, and they can also be sued by Nike for copyright infringement because they have lost the license from SA Rugby to produce actual Springbok memorabilia and official merchandise.
Yeah.
So brands, as I say, have to be very careful, but the individual on the street also has to know that they're taking money out of SA Rugby's pockets by buying counterfeit merchandise, because that money doesn't make it back to the manufacturer or SA Rugby as the right holder.
And let's speak about the players. Some of the spin-offs for them, of course, comes with endorsements of various brands. How do those negotiations go by? And also, does SARU get involved in those negotiations, considering that the player is employed by a body and they have some contractual obligations with that particular body? And would the body also be involved in the contract negotiations once a brand approach a player, and in the likes of Siya Kolisi, for instance, who has now endorsed various brands?
Yeah, so this one is a bit tricky with regards to major tournaments. Individual players, when they play for a club, can have, so what generally happens is that a player's image rights are protected. And the image rights protect the player's name, image, likeness, even a player's voice, anything that's really associated with the player. They would ordinarily have an agreement with the club that they play for. And those agreements, generally the club would say to them, as long as your image rights agreements don't clash with those of the club, then it's fine. Within SA Rugby and SARU, there's a union called My Players, which protects the rights of professional rugby players in the country. My Players goes into negotiations with SARU around image rights for players. SARU would then pay those players for the right to use their image, but The player can also have other image rights agreements. Let's say, for instance, with Sia Kolisi, as you rightly mentioned his example, he signed an agreement with Adidas to have a specific boot made for him, specifically for this World Cup. He's an Adidas ambassador. Even though Nike is the manufacturer of Springbok shirts, he can have his own separate boot deal, and he doesn't have to wear Nike boots, for example. But those agreements are signed, and they negotiated with my players and the players and SA Rugby well in advance, so everyone knows what they're profiting from. It's either from the player side in terms of their own agreements, or whether SA Rugby then goes on and signs up agreements with checkers and so on to use these players and ads and generate revenue that way. But yes, there is a lot of profit that comes through to the players from associations with various brands. It's either paid upfront, and then those images are used throughout the competition or throughout a tournament, or a player has their own separate agreement where they have an agreement with a brand that pays them specifically for only that brand. But it's multifaceted. It really depends on the deal.
Yeah. Just a final one is comparing rugby to other major sporting codes, like, for instance, soccer and American football. Do you think that rugby has the potential to actually reach those heights?
It'll be very difficult for rugby to do that, but it has the potential. The difficulty is that, football or soccer is very easy. You play with your feet. You can make a soccer ball very easily. You can play wherever. Whereas with rugby, you also play with your feet. You play with your hands. You can play wherever. But the rules aren't as simple to understand, and it also depends on how far-reaching these sports are. Rugby is trying to grow the game. The next World Cup is going to be expanded to 2014. But to catch up to football is very, very difficult. Cricket even more so. Would all of the Anglophone speaking countries that have specific sports that came from the colonial areas and so on, those aren't as it's not as easy to grow those sports. But all of these sports are trying to grow. Rugby is in the Olympics. Cricket will be in the next Olympics. So it is the more these sports can get exposed to wider society and be taken into the furthest reaches of the world, the better for all of these sports.
Thank you so much for your time, Nqobile. And you got to make sure that you have your jersey on tomorrow. We'll be watching you on social media as well. That is Nqobile Ndlovu, who is a sports economist. They're on crunching those numbers, looking at the economics of international sporting events such as the Rugby World Cup, and of course the final being tomorrow.